Good morning, everybody. This is Scott Sackett from Washington State Archives Records Management, and welcome to today's webinar on transferring scanned minutes, ordinances, and resolutions to the digital archives. Some of you may have already transferred records to the digital archives. Many more of you have transferred paper records to our branch archives. But this session is intended to give you an overview of how the process occurs, what records can be transferred, and those sorts of things. And in this slide, you'll see we'll talk very briefly about the purpose of the digital archives and also what records can be transferred to the digital archives. Then we'll dig deeper on the details in terms of what the scanning requirements are, if you're scanning your minutes, ordinances, and resolutions, also what the indexing requirements are, the metadata, the information we need to have in order to make those records searchable. And then I'll do a walkthrough for you of the image and index transfer process using a tool that was developed by the Digital Archives called Archive This. And we'll also take a peek at what access looks like post-transfer. Some folks have questions of how do I access these records once they've been transferred to the archives, because when the archives takes in these records, we're making a commitment not just to preserve them, but to make them available to the public in accordance with the laws of the state of Washington. Now, the Digital Archives first opened in 2004, and the reason that it was developed as its own facility is that the laws of the state of Washington in defining records and defining archival records, it doesn't make the distinction of that it pertains to paper records only. It pertains to records, whatever form they may take. And increasingly, we're creating and receiving records at local and state government agencies that are born digital or converted from paper into digital form. And we need to have a way to preserve those. Whereas paper can be preserved largely by leaving it alone if you put it in proper storage conditions, the electronic records have a tendency to become inaccessible rather quickly. As formats change, file formats, operating systems, software versions, storage media, if you created a file 30 years ago, a WordStar file on a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk, if you haven't done anything else with it but store it, if you've still got that record there, it's arguable as to whether you actually have preserved that record. Good luck finding something that will run a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk in WordStar. So the Digital Archives was developed to actively manage those types of records, those records that have historical importance. And most people are familiar with the Digital Archives through its public face, our website www.digitalarchives.wa.gov, and the millions of records that are searchable in our searchable collections. What people may not know is that there are a lot of records that are non-searchable that are being preserved at the archives. Some of them have yet to be indexed, some of them haven't had a search interface integrated with them yet, and there are still others that are exempt from public search, or if they are confidential under statute, then those records may need to be preserved, but they're not necessarily available openly to the public. And since you interact with the Digital Archive site as a website, you're not really going to run into the staff, but there are several staff, programmers, security experts, and they are constantly working to protect the Digital Archives and to continue to improve it. Now, what we're going to be talking about today in particular are meeting and legislation records that are designated as archival. If you're a state government agency, one of the schedules that you're using is the State Government General Records Retention Schedule, or SGGRRS. If you're a local government agency, you are using, among possibly other records retention schedules, the Local Government Common Records Retention Schedule, which we often call the CORE. And both of those schedules talk about the records of governing or executive bodies, and the meetings that take place of those governing bodies, and also of advisory bodies. Those are designated as archival. We're focusing today specifically on scanned images of the official, signed and approved minutes, ordinances, and or resolutions from those meetings. One thing I do want to note, though, is sometimes we'll get contacted by an agency that says, we have, say, we have the minutes and ordinances and resolutions, and we've got them as Word files. If you're using those Word files to print out, say, your minutes, and then they're being made official through a signature, that Word file itself doesn't serve as the official record because it doesn't contain that crucial evidence that indeed this was approved at that meeting. What we're looking for in that case is the paper record. Some agencies do verify or do make their records official in an online environment, say through digital signatures or something like that. Those can be transferred too. We'll talk about that during this session, but just want to make sure that you know that what we're looking for is a scan or the original of the record that was made official. We need to see if there was a signature. We need to see that signature as part of the document. Here's a quick view of one of the two series that we'd be looking at in the state general schedule. It's called Governing Executive Policy Setting Body Records. And you see I noted here that minutes and resolutions are among the records that are created. And you'll see on the far right that they are designated as archival permanent retention, which in brief means either your agency is keeping those forever or the archives is keeping them forever, or we both are. Advisory body records, similarly, are described here in the state general schedule. You see these are a slightly different archival designation, appraisal required. And in that case, you can find out more about this from taking one of our other webinars, but appraisal required in brief means that when those records meet their retention period, if your agency does not want to keep them any longer, it needs to contact the archives, and we will appraise those records for their historical value and determine whether they need to come to the archives for permanent preservation. This is a glance at the core schedule for local governments and the companion series for governing and executive meetings. You see this covers those minutes from the meetings from the local government agencies, governing bodies, and executive management. And as you see on the right, they're archival permanent retention in terms of their designation. And then we also have the series for advisory meetings, including the minutes from those meetings. And as with the state schedule, they are archival appraisal required. And lastly, in the local schedule, in the core, we have a series called Ordinances and Resolutions Approved. And with those, it says retain until no longer needed for agency business, then transfer to Washington State Archives for permanent retention. So it's got that same archival permanent retention designation, meaning whether your agency is retaining them forever or our agency is, they do need to be around from here on. Now, if you are scanning these records, these paper records that have been made official through signature, a few things that we need to look at are include how that record is made into a digital format, how it is converted. For resolution, in terms of image resolution, we are looking at 300 dots per inch or 300 pixels per inch or higher. We can potentially get a workable image out of 200 dots per inch. However, it's highly advised to do 300 or higher. Basically, we want to make sure that we get a legible and searchable document. And if you have something, if you have a document at a resolution that cannot be used with OCR, optical character recognition, very well, if it's too fuzzed out, the OCR may have some difficulty interpreting the letters, finding what the letters are, identifying them appropriately. In terms of the file format, what we're looking at mainly is multi-page TIFF. And when we're saying multi-page TIFF, that doesn't mean all of your minutes for a month or a year are in one TIFF document. What that would mean is one document per set of minutes. So today is February 7th and you have a meeting today, the minutes are 8 pages long, you have one 8-page TIFF document. And TIFF stands for Tagged Image File Format. Same with ordinances or resolutions. For each ordinance or resolution, you would have a TIFF of however long it needs to be. If it's a 3-page ordinance, a 3-page TIFF. Often we get the question about whether PDF is acceptable in this case. If your agency has already scanned the records and you're asking after they have been created, we can take those in potentially. However, they are not a preferred format. TIFF is what the system works most easily with and is least likely to change as a standard over time. I mentioned at the beginning that you may have minutes, ordinances, and resolutions that are approved electronically, or that were not signed in order to become official, where the digital version could serve as the official version. If they are born digital, we ask that you convert those to PDF-A format, what's sometimes known as the PDF archival format. And that's usually among the options within programs that you have. That's usually among the options for how you can do a save as, so using that PDF-A format. And in terms of file compression, we recommend using uncompressed or lossless compression. Actually, I would say that we require using uncompressed or lossless compression. What file compression is, it's an algorithm that serves to make that image smaller, make it easier to store in that way and easier to call up. But the problem is when you use compression algorithms like that, some of them are lossy. They sacrifice some detail in order to make a smaller file. So we require that either you not compress it at all or you use one of the lossless compression techniques used here, which those can be used to make it a little smaller, but they do not sacrifice any detail. We're trying to preserve these records, of course, for the very, very long term. So we want to lose no detail as we migrate those records from one format to another as needed in the decades to come. Now, the indexing requirements are pretty modest. In terms of the format for the indexing, there are a number of possibilities. Most folks will use Excel, just do it as an Excel spreadsheet, or even work in Excel and then save it as a comma-separated values file. We can also take that in as a delimited text file, whether that's pipe delimited, semicolon delimited, or tab delimited. We can work with any of those to get this information from you. And there are a total of 7 required fields for minutes. And for ordinances and resolutions, which tend to be numbered, as well as having a date associated with them, we have 8 required fields. Just that numbering adds 1 field to it. You can certainly, if you've indexed other fields, you can include those in what you transfer. Those will display with the individual records when you call them up, but you won't be able to use those terms to search. For example, if you happen to note what the time span was, what the time of day was that the meeting was held, how long it lasted, something like that, you can have that field in there if you like, but it won't be searchable. And we provide sample and blank indexing templates in Excel for each type of record. And that was among the handouts that were sent to you today prior to this webinar. I give you samples for the minutes, ordinances, and resolutions. So those 7 or 8 indexing fields are listed here. And there are some that you will be able to fill in once on the sheet and then just copy to all the other entries. I'll note those as we go. The first one is a unique reference identifier. Every image needs to have a unique identifier, a unique file name to it. And that cannot contain any spaces or periods or special characters like exclamation point or ampersand or things like that. Though the dash and that little underline, those are both okay as characters, but those are the only special characters that you can use. The image file name very often will be the same as your unique reference identifier. You can have it be different if you like, but most cases we see when agencies are transferring, A and B end up being the same information. C, agency, is one of those fields that's going to be the same throughout a record series that you're transferring. So it will say agency, for example, Franklin County, or City of Cheney, or Grant County Public Utility District. And then similarly with D, that lists department, division, or committee, you list what is the body from that agency that has created these records. For example, for the PUD, it might be the Board of Commissioners. For City of Cheney, it would be City Council, say. For some other agency, it might be a planning commission. E, well, if these were minutes, column E would end up being document date, but in the case of ordinances and resolutions, you would enter the ordinance or resolution number here, and just following the system that however that ordinance or resolution was identified originally, that's the ordinance or resolution number you'd put here. And F would be the document date. One thing to note here is that the format that we ask you to put these in is different from what most folks are used to. Instead of having the year at the end, we ask you to have the year at the beginning. So it's 4-digit year / 2-digit month / 2-digit day. So in that case, if it were for today, it would be 2017 / 02 / 07. Document type is another one of those fields that's going to be like column C and column D, that's going to be the same throughout your indexing document. So that's going to say minutes or ordinances or resolutions all the way down in that column. And similarly with party type, for the types of bodies that we're talking about transferring here, the party type is just always going to say entity. So you put that in the first line, and you can copy and paste all the way down for that column. Here's an example, just a couple of entries on a sample indexing spreadsheet. This was when we were transferring some of the recent State Records Committee meetings from a couple of years ago. And you see we've got the unique reference identifier and image file name here. They are effectively the same. The only difference is in the image file name, you see that it's got the three character file suffix, so .tif in this case. It's a State Records Committee. We identify this as, in terms of department, division, or committee, as committee. The date of the document, the fact that it's minutes, and the party type, entity. So once you have scanned these records at 300 dots per inch or better as TIFF files, the next question is, well, what do we do with this? There's one more document that you're going to need to complete before submitting these records or getting in touch with us. There's a document called the Transfer Information Plan, which was included as another of your handouts. If you can complete and submit that, we can get the process started. And if you have questions as you're filling that out, we are happy to assist you in that regard. Feel free to contact Records Management or the Digital Archives, and have our contact information at the end of this, and we will be happy to assist you. When you complete that transfer information plan, which just gives us some basic information about the records so we can prepare for them, what format are they, what record series are they, what dates are covered, that sort of thing. We can use that, and if you haven't transferred records to the Digital Archives before, the Electronic Records Archivist will create a document called a Transmittal Agreement. We sometimes refer to that as the TA. And that's the legal agreement stating what the archives will do with these records in terms of committing to preserve them, provide access to them, and it's the legal document that also transfers the responsibility for these records from your agency to the archives. With that transmittal agreement, that will be sent to you, and the appropriate person at your agency would sign and return it. The next step before you actually perform the transfer is getting training in the use of ArchiveThis, which is the transfer tool. It kind of packages up the records, if you will, and sends them to the digital archives. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But the ArchiveThis transfer tool, it's relatively easy to use, but it's not necessarily intuitive from the get-go. So we do provide a brief training and are also happy to assist if you're having any difficulty in later transfers. We will also give you training in web admin, which is your backdoor access to these records. If you had records that happened to be, for one reason or another, exempt from public disclosure, you're not going to run into that really with much with minutes, ordinances, and resolutions. But with other records that you transfer, if there was something that, for whatever reason, could not be displayed publicly online, web admin would give you access to those records for those who are authorized at your agency. You know, they'd be given an ID and password access, that sort of thing, so they could view those records kind of on the back end. Once you've received the training and you've had the TA in place already and you've submitted your TIP, we've verified it's complete, we will work with you on the initial transfer. Sometimes people will ask that that the transfer be done kind of during their training, to do that as a sample, and that's fine, we can do that, or you can do it independently. I see that Patty's got a question. I will get to your question in just a moment, but wanted to state that generally this is going to be happening online using file transfer protocol. As long as the size of all these images and the index information together is less than 250 gigabytes, file transfer protocol should work fine. If we find on your transfer information plan that you've got more than 250 gigabytes, what the digital archives can do is provide you with a portable hard drive, verified, clean. We'll send it to you in a secure locked case with a security tag on it and another security tag that you can put on it once you've saved to the portable hard drive. Just because if it's over 250 gigabytes, the amount of time, the amount of bandwidth that's required to transfer that makes this the easier way of doing it. Then once you make the transfer, we will send you a confirmation, and you'll see a detail on that in one of the later slides, confirmation of the transfer and ingestion having taken place. Patty said, I'm not locating the TIP. Well, I will double check. I believe that should be one of the, I believe there were 8 attachments in what was sent to everybody before the class. But I will be happy to look, and if that's missing, well, I'll make sure that you get a copy. But here on, I believe it's on this next slide, here's a glimpse of what that looks like, where it's identifying who's doing the transfer, the division, department, or office, and what's the agency there up top, what the record series is, and the associated disposition authority number, or DAN, what the date range is of those records. We also want to verify what the file format is, the overall volume. And so if you've got all these images, say, stored in one folder, if you right-click and look at properties, you can get an idea fairly quickly of what the overall volume is for those records. Generally, the answer on this one's going to be no, but if the records have ever been out of your agency's custody, to your knowledge, say if they were stored with a private company or they were lost for some period, they were unable to be found, that's a good, that's the place where you'd note that, and we'd probably add that in the summary description of contents over at far right as well. And again, with minutes, ordinances, and resolutions, the current statutory restrictions would list no restrictions. But if you were sending some other type of record later on, just know that this is where you would include something that says, for example, these records are attorney-client privileged under thus and such RCW. The summary description of contents is just a sentence or two talking about what these records are. And in this case, you see scanned files of original signed ordinances and resolutions adopted by the Cheney City Council, and giving an idea of what the date range of those is. And that's really all the information that we need there. You note with the minutes, we did include, also includes referenced and supporting documents. But it's just a very brief description, kind of giving some context to what these records are. Thank you, Ellie. I hadn't seen that. The TIP is named Transfer Inventory Spreadsheet. Sorry, I guess I should have called it the TIS in this case, or changed it back to Plan. So thank you both, Ellie and Patty, for pointing that out. This is the transmittal agreement, and it's pretty small on this, which is one of the reasons I wanted to include it as a sample document in the handouts. The transmittal agreement, as I've mentioned, is the understanding, the legal agreement between your agency and the archives. And the electronic records archivist at the digital archives will set up this record, complete the part at the top, and this kind of sets up the legal groundwork for these records to come to the archives. And you see at the bottom that the appropriate authority at your agency or the records officer signs it, and then also the appropriate regional archivist or branch archivist or the state archivist can sign this on our side. So let's talk a little bit. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now. Before we talk about Archive This, how you access it and how it works as you're transferring records. If there aren't any questions, though, I will just proceed. Archive This, currently it's only accessible through Internet Explorer in terms of what browser you're using at present. And it does require .NET Framework 4.5. Haven't found that to be a problem with any agencies thus far, but if you're not sure, you may want to ask your support person in terms of IT, whether that's an individual or a department. Make sure that you're set up with that. When you first log in, when you're provided with login information, this is the screen that you will encounter when you open Archive This, and it will generally have username and password filled in already, and you will enter your full name and your email address, and it's a good idea here to click Remember Me, and then log in, and you're in. So what it's first going to ask you is what sort of data format, for the metadata you're sending, what is the format for it? And you're going to be opting whether you've got an Excel file or a comma-separated values file or a delimited text file. That's one of the choices there, the flat file as it's listed here. And if these are records where the originals haven't already been transferred to the state archives, you're going to click No. Your records are not from the holdings of the Washington State Archives. And then Next at the bottom right. Our next question is, what are you sending to us? You'll see there are three partner fields at the top that look kind of redundant, but each one of them means a different thing. We'll go into that in just a second. But we want to identify what body produced these records, what body currently has custody of these records, and what is the body, the entity that is transferring these records right now. And also, what is the start date for these records and the end date? Even if there are gaps in that date, we want to know what the earliest and latest dates are. You don't need to worry about the DAN over here at the middle right. When you select the record series, this record series line will be pre-populated with the record series that you have signed on to transfer. If you have if your transfer information plan, your transfer information spreadsheet said you're transferring minutes and ordinances, then those are two of the choices that will show up there under record series. And you don't have to worry about the introduction or the source of the records. It's not a bad idea to take a look at it. If there's something there that is incorrect, let us know. But that, again, is going to be pre-populated or populated later on by the archives. And you want to check down here. Let's see, with these, It says records are orderable. With these records, actually, the images and indexes will be freely available. So in that case, in that particular case, you may uncheck that, because someone can, when they call up this individual record, they can print that out. They can view it. They can save a copy of the digital document, that sort of thing. And you would want to check that yes, the metadata for this is archival along with the image. Now, I'd said that those roles were kind of overlapping, or it seemed kind of redundant. This is how we define those three different roles. When we ask for the records creator, what we're asking is who originally created the records being transferred. Sometimes it's going to be the same answer for all three categories, but say you've got an irrigation district, and it used to be made up of several different irrigation districts, and this happens to be one of those predecessor districts. That might be what you'd list there in records creator. The custodial partner is the body that has legal custody of the records at the time of transfer. So say if you've got irrigation district 10, which used to be made up of 1, 2, 3, and 4, records creator might say these are the minutes of irrigation district 1. The custodial partner is the body that exists now that has legal custody, irrigation district 10. And then submitting partner is the entity or body that is transferring the records to the digital archives. So that's going to be the entity for which you are working, for the person who is transferring these records. If the archives happens to be submitting some of these records itself, if we had scanned them at our end and we're sending them in, the archives would be listed as the submitting partner in this case. But when you're submitting these records, it's going to be your agency. Then with that basic information in place, what we'll do is ask you to point out to archive this where the information is found. So you identify the metadata format, whether it's comma-separated values file or an Excel document or one of those types of delimited text files. And then we'll move on here to where the path is. Where do we find these records? So usually what's most helpful is to use this browse button here, and then you can find the particular folder, the particular area where that metadata file is located. And in this case, you are sending not just this indexing information, but it pertains to images. So the metadata references digital objects. That little checkbox there should be checked. And if you've got the first row, and the examples that we have for you, the first row is populated with the names of the fields. So if that's the case, then you'd want to make sure that box is checked as well. Then in addition to the metadata, we're asking for the digital objects, the images themselves. What format are they? You've got a drop-down menu there, and you'd indicate TIFF. Again, using browse, you'd indicate where those records are located. And with all of these records, again, unless you've got something which is more likely to happen with other types of records that is confidential under statute, the digital object restrictions should just say is displayable on the website, basically meaning this is freely available. So moving on from there, the Archive This program will look for both the images and the index information and ask you to match up your data fields to the data fields that are listed for the archives. And this really is a one-time thing that you have to do the first time. And again, we're happy to assist you with it. Once you create this mapping back and forth to your different fields, you can save this, as you see up here. It says load, save, and delete. You can save it, and then the next time you're doing a transfer, you can actually load that as a template. And so at the top here, it's where you're showing the source column, so what it says in your document, the destination column, and what the display name will be online. And for all of these as well, showing that it's displayable on the website is the default, and it's fine to leave it that way. At the bottom, below where it says file column name, it's giving you a look at what it will look like, what the data will look like according to what you designated up above. So as I said, once per title. The first time you're doing this transfer, you can make these designations. You see at this point I've gotten through the top 3 and I'm working on entity and saying where to put that. Once you've done that, you can save it as a template. You name the template and just hit save. At that point, Archive This takes that information, the images and indexes, and goes to work. It prepares the records for transfer, makes sure that for every image there's an index entry, and that for every index entry there is an image. And it can take, as it says, the operation will take a few moments to complete. That can be several minutes, so just keep that in mind. It's not usually an instantaneous process. But then gets to the end. If it finds any errors, for example, if the file name that you reference in column A or column B of the indexing document, if that doesn't match the name that was given to one of the images, it will point that out. So it will point out any discrepancies, and you will have an opportunity to fix those and then kind of repeat that setup process and then when it doesn't encounter any difficulties, any discrepancies, it will give you this response. Your records have been prepared for transfer to the digital archives, and you're ready for the next step. At that point, so it's lined up these records, it's got them queued, so you actually puts you back to the first screen that you'd encountered, but there's new information there that says you have data queued for transfer to the digital archives. Click here to transfer the data to us. So at this point, if you were just transferring, say, a group of minutes from your agency to the archives, and that's all you wanted to send, you could just click there where it says click here to transfer the data to us. If you also wanted to send ordinances and resolutions, something like that, you'd start plugging in that information under data format for however many sets of records that you were sending. So when you click the OK, I'm ready to transfer here, it will take you to a list of the records that have been queued up that are ready to send. So you can just click select all as indicated here, or if you want to send some of the things that are in line and not others, you could just click them individually. And most of you are going to be then clicking this button, Upload to Digital Archives. As I mentioned, if it's under 250 gigabytes total volume, then you'll be able to send it as an upload. In the event that you've got something larger, we'll have worked with you to make sure that you have a hard drive from the digital archive that you'll be exporting to. But either way, whichever way you're sending us the records, you'll be using Archive This to prepare those records for transfer. So you click one of those or the other. Usually it's going to be the Upload to Digital Archives. And then it will, just as it prepped the records before, it will start uploading the records. This can take a while. It may be a period if you're trying to time this and there's a point where you're going to be going to lunch, this might be the good time to go to lunch, depending on how many records you're transferring. If it's a particularly large batch, if we're looking at multiple gigabytes, tens or a couple hundred gigabytes, don't just sit there and wait for it to complete. Something where you can go do something else and come back to it. And as it goes, you'll notice right here, might be a little hard to read, but it will let you know what, at any particular moment, what file is being uploaded. And once it's completed the transfer, it basically puts a seal of sorts on it. It creates a digital fingerprint file that is unique to those records that are being sent, and that authenticate that, yep, on this date, at this time, these are the records that came to the digital archives. And then it says done. And it shows the lists that were up there above, the records that you sent, are gone. So what you can do, you can queue more if you want to send some more records at that point, or you can proceed and just close out of Archive This. Okay. drawing a little arrow here up to the upper right corner where you close out of it. Very shortly after the transfer occurs, you will receive the first of two email confirmations. First one's called an incoming data validation report. And what that says is basically, it's kind of like, in a sense, like a shipping notice or something that we've received and verified the data from your organization. It hasn't been ingested fully into the digital archive system yet, but it's basically, I mean, it's the digital equivalent of we've got it on the loading dock. We've accepted it here at the loading dock. We haven't unpacked it and put it into the system yet. And it reminds you that you will be alerted one more time when the preservation process finishes. And it has a brief description of the record, the size of the transfer, the record creator, the custodial partner, certain things like that. Then a little while later, usually within 24 hours, you will get what's called an ingested data report, which means that not only has the information been received, but it has been taken into the archive system. It will be available shortly in the through the Digital Archives website if this is, in the case of minutes, ordinances, and resolutions, something that's going to be searchable online. And this email will also include a completed archival records transfer form. So it provides that evidence of this is what was transferred and this was when. And you'll want to keep that record among your records. So if someone says, prove that you sent these records to the archives, that is your evidence. As I mentioned, the first transfer, if you like, we can do that. We can assist you in the process. For subsequent transfers, the timing of those is completely up to you. It's not like we'll call you on a monthly basis and say, hey, do you have more records to send or anything like that. Whenever you're ready, you can send more meeting records, more minutes, ordinances, resolutions after each meeting if you like. You can do it each month, each quarter, each year, whatever works for you. There's no need to notify the archives ahead of time. That said, if you have questions, or if it's been a while since you've transferred some, you need a refresher training or something like that, we're happy to provide that. And if you've got other archival designated electronic records, whether they're digitized or whether they're born digital, give us a holler at the Records Management Help Desk, and the contact information for that is on the last slide. But you can contact us and we'll assist you there. Let's see, Patty, you said, I work for a water district incorporated in 1948. We have never transferred a document, so we have a lot. I'm overwhelmed. And we are here to help, Patty. We're happy to work with you on appraisal and transfer of the records that need to be transferred in paper and and in electronic form. Now, have you scanned the water district's minutes, resolutions, that sort of thing? You have, okay, great. Then what we can do is certainly feel free to email me, and I can either work with you myself or put you in touch with one of my colleagues at the other branches who can walk you through this process. But it doesn't. You don't have to send everything all at once. If that's too big a chunk, if you've got some a certain set of records that you wanted to transfer now as almost like a test case, that's just fine. We can move at your speed, whatever that needs to be. My pleasure. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about what access looks like once you have transferred these records. I'd mentioned before the Digital Archives website, which is listed there at the top. The records at that point will be searchable and viewable by the public. Someone can look at your records by keyword, simple search. They can do a detailed search, say, okay, show me all minutes that you have for agencies within this county, for local agencies within this county or within this date range. And you can also browse within a title, just say, show me everything for the China Ditch Irrigation District for these years. With these particular records, users can view or print the images for free. If someone happened to need a certified copy, we do provide contact information, so where someone can go, whether that's to the archives or to your agency. That contact information is included with the individual record result. And if you did find after the fact that there was metadata that was incorrect, or if there were confidential records that you'd sent, as I mentioned before, you've got backdoor access to those who are accordingly authorized with the digital archives through this web admin, this separate web admin tool. So this is just a sample of it going in, whether you're from your agency or a member of the public looking at another agency's minutes, ordinances, and resolutions. You could go to the collections drop-down menu here and say you want to look at record series. And it will give you a list of all the, on the far left side, it'll show you all the different types of record series that are available. I mean, you see we take in all different types of records, audio records from meetings. We're actually going to be having I believe it's next week, we've got a separate session, webinar on transferring audio records of meetings. But we've got other files like death records, early census records, those sorts of things. Here we've selected, okay, minute records. And once you click on that, it will show you all the agencies for which we have minutes. Let's say I want to look at State Records Committee minutes. So I just clicked on that on the right-hand side, and it will take you to the title screen for that particular set of records. You can type in a keyword, like I typed in ecology in this case. You could also indicate a date range. If you're like, I know it was a meeting during the 1980s, so let's put in 1980 to 1989 in there. And then you can hit search. Or you can select browse this series, and it will just give you in order by, I think it's generally going to be in order by date, the files that are available. And you'll note that some of the information before that was in the description when you transfer the records, that shows up here. In this case, let's say I hit browse and had gone through this and was looking at the 1990 and 1991 records. These are ones that actually, I mean, I've been browsing in this case. I mean, I've searched on the word ecology, and it says all of these contain that word somewhere in there. So let me look at the one from January 9th, 1991. So here's the individual results screen that contains the metadata that you'd provided before. You know, what the document type is, what the file name is, those sorts of things. And over here on the right, you've got the image attached. And it looks like it's a one-page record. Click on that, and it gives you, lets you view it. You can also right-click and save it. Can set it up as a printer-friendly version. And what I'd mentioned before in terms of keyword searching, as long as the optical character recognition tool can recognize the writing within that file, OCR works pretty well to create text searchability. Now you see on this was probably created on something with a dot matrix printer. It'll do pretty darn well with that. With handwriting, so sometimes with your very earliest records, depending on when your agency started, those can be, that's kind of where OCR tends to have some trouble. You can't do much text searching if it's handwritten material, because OCR tries its best, but it's not a human. It doesn't necessarily recognize individual idiosyncrasies with handwriting. And here's another example, in this case from the Port of Olympia, their commission minutes, where you can see up here it was a 10-page document, and so that you can file through those records, you can save those images as needed. So that's a walk through both the prep process, the transfer process, and the access process after you've transferred the records. Are there questions that anyone has in regard to transferring these records? As I mentioned, we will be having next week a session on transferring audio records, and for local agencies, we'll have a session on transferring electronic publications 2 weeks after that on the 21st. If there are any questions at this point, I'm happy to answer them. Let's see, is this the email? recordsmanagement@sos.wa.gov. Yes, indeed it is. That's the Records Management Help Desk. You can also contact me directly at the information on the first slide, which is scott.sackett@sos.wa.gov. So if you've got the handouts, look at the first slide, and that will have my contact information as well. I will turn off the recording now, and if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them out of session. But go forward and manage those records. Let us know how we can help. Thank you.